Okay, Tim, welcome to the podcast and thank you for sparing some limited time, I imagine, to come and have a chat with me today.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
No, it's my pleasure. So I can imagine that most people tuning in are going to be relatively familiar, if not very familiar, with you, what you're up to, your passions. But for those people that might not be, are you happy to share a little bit around, I guess, your journey ultimately? And then we can kind of dive into things from there.
Yeah, of course. I'll make it quick because it's all about what the guys can learn today. So, I mean, basically, I've been a dopamine dominant 200-mile-an-hour guy as far back as I can remember, and starting company at around about 23 years of age, and working 16, 18-hour days, determined to make it big. And I've had a string of successful companies through my life. But when I hit kind of 30, 31, somewhere 31, 32, sorry, I got quite ill, and I hadn't got ill before. I mean, sure, I'd get a hangover or a headache from time to time. And I had other things historical that I didn't realize I had going on, in all honesty, because I just didn't know how to label it as a health issue. But I was 200 miles an hour nonstop until I started getting ill, and that just started having fatigue or being tired, started having urinary issues and whatnot. And then really where it hit me hard was I went to Bali. Before I went to Bali, I had all the jabs and everything. I had a rabies jab as well. And then within 24 hours, my knee started playing up, and it was so painful I couldn't walk on it. And even to rest it up, it was really painful. So something wasn't quite right, and I'm not blaming on the jabs at all. I'm not a pro or against Vaxxer, FYI. I'm pro health, and whatever that, whatever the goal, whatever it is to get to health is what I believe in. So anyway, so I started getting ill. When I came back from Bali, within 24 hours, I was in hospital with a kidney stone stuck in my ureter. And wow. It was insane. It was like literally insane. It felt like I had a knife in my gut, like cutting me open very slowly, which is basically what's happening from the inside in your ureter. It's a scratchy stone caught, and it was pretty bad. Anyway, I didn't know what was going on, and I was a bit stressed from that. And they said that any can pop up whenever, and they can attack you whenever. And once you start forming kidney stones, that's it. You got them for life. Blah 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 blah. And I kind of didn't really accept that. I wanted to get to the bottom of it, but I was completely new to the whole health space. I didn't know anything at all. And then I started getting urinary tract infections, and obviously I went on antibiotics, and then I got prostatitis at the age of like 32, which is very, prostatitis isn't, but prostate issues is. UTI pretty much every day of the week, which is just insane, even though they could never find any bacteria and all this crazy stuff. So I was on more and more and more antibiotics, which then made me more and more and more tired. I got more and more bloated. I was eating less and less. I was having more and more restrictive food, and I started realizing that I couldn't eat things like, I was on the anti-candida diet, actually, at the peak of everyone going on about candida years and years ago, I guess at the beginning of the trend. And all the doctors were saying there's no such thing as candida unless you've got AIDS and all this stuff. And it was just so conflicting. Anyway, I realized I went for a functional practitioner just by chance. And she tested me for some various things. And one of them showed I had candida. Obviously, one of them mentioned about metal fillings, which I'd had like a yeast infection, I guess, in my mouth a year before next to a metal filling. And so I Googled metal fillings and thrush, and it told me about mercury toxicity and amalgam illness. So I started studying that, and then linking in mercury toxicity or amalgam illness to gut issues, immune issues, brain fog, even kidney stones, which is obviously down to leaky gut. And oxalates in the diet, and a stressed liver from not being able to deal with oxalates properly, and endogenous oxalate production as well. So I kind of started piecing them all together, and that's at that point I did a cause and effect chart on the wall with post-it, basically all all the different symptoms, linking them back together to see what it came back to. And every time it came back to mercury, for some reason. And so anyway, I studied it. I read every single book I could on the subject. I was researching around the clock. I was in a heightened state of fight or flight pretty much around the clock, just studying. And my assumption was if I had a clean brain or a clear brain and I got rid of the brain fog, if I have a clear brain, I can figure everything out. So I worked on mental clarity first, thus the nootropics and various other things that I did along the way. So I became a biohacker without knowing what it was. And then one day someone mentioned bulletproof coffee to me and said, you got to try this stuff. So I did. And that was at like 9 a.m. Next thing I know, it was in the afternoon, and me and my girlfriend at the time had been sitting head down, working nonstop, focused, like absolute crazy. And I knew I was onto something. So I looked up bulletproof coffee, and up popped Dave Asprey, and started listening to his podcast. And then he obviously learned quite a lot from him, and then all the other people in the industry at the time before, there was hundreds of biohackers everywhere, I guess. Heard about hyperbaric oxygen therapy. I tried it out and I loved it. It was very expensive, so I decided to open a clinic, which I did in London. Being a business guy with mental clarity, I did, which kind of grew to be quite a good size and very busy very, very quickly. And then started the Biohacker London meetup group because I wanted a community like Dave built in LA with the Bulletproof conference. And that grew and grew and grew, but people kept on asking me what biohacking was. Health optimization is a good description for it for me. And so I called it the Health Optimization and Biohacker London meetup group. That got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until people said, why don't you do a conference? So I did. And basically everyone I've met along the way, which just happened to be some of the big names or most of the big names, from Dave, obviously himself, through to John Gray, from Men Are From Mars, Women From Venus, Ben Pakulski, and everyone in between kind of built the summit. So that kind of put me on the map. And since then, obviously Dave has invested personally in the summit. So he's now my business partner. I'd consider him my mentor as well, which is awesome. And building out conferences with Dave, basically the non-US ones. So that's basically what's happening. Your history. Yeah, it's quite a surreal one. But I'm just following the fun and trying to optimize my health and sharing what I learn along the way. Whether people agree with me or not, it's up to them, but I'm just sharing what works for me. So that's where I find myself today.
No, I think it's an awesome story, that you've been through. And it might be a big question, so we might want to break it down a little bit, but the one that comes up most for me is sort of wanting to explore some of the key lessons that you've learned along the way. If you've got someone, if you had almost a younger version of yourself who was seeking some support and was maybe a little bit lost in regards to information they were absorbing, where's a good place to start, do you think, when you are struggling like you were many years ago?
I'm just making a note of that. I would say the best place you could possibly start is by finding a functional medicine doctor and doing the research to find a good one. Because like with biological dentistry, when you realize that there's such a thing other than just standard dentists, you realize, there's a subset of it. And I'll give you an example. If you've never had wine before in your life, all you know is wine. And then someone says, you can have red or white. And you go, okay, red or white. And then you go red, white. Okay, let's pick red. And then you go the region, then you go the year, and then you go the farm itself. Okay. You refine and you refine and you refine until you can drink one and you go, this is a very floral one. I reckon it comes from this region and blah, blah. You become an expert down the rabbit hole. So with that mindset, as with anything, including biohacking, one day you just hear about bulletproof coffee and you're a biohacker. And then you start learning more and more and more. Next thing you know, you're injecting peptides in your belly every day. But it's about refinement. So when it comes to a functional medicine, a doctor, you go doctor, red or white. You go functional or standard allopathic. A functional medicine doctor is good. start searching for a good one, because a good one, it's just functional medicine or not. You don't necessarily know if it's going to be a great one. So it's worth finding out what the great one is and what that means, and seeing people that they've worked with before, because they will be a good guide. Now, bearing in mind that they are a doctor, and while I have nothing against doctors at all, quite the opposite, they are restricted in what they can talk about or what they can recommend. Functional medicine ones or integrated medicine doctors do have a bit more flexibility, but they're always at risk of losing their license for telling you stuff that isn't necessarily approved. Whereas when I think you work with a functional practitioner, or like a nutritionist, or someone that hasn't necessarily got something that they spent hundreds of thousands of pounds earning their degrees and doctorates and God knows what, they are slightly more flexible to tell you things that might not be mainstream yet, but might be super effective. Things that haven't necessarily had double-blind studies. But when biohackers have tested it, thousands of people around the world, and they all have a great response to this new supplement, whatever it may be, you know, a functional practitioner could recommend that to you and say, hey, why don't you try this? Whereas a functional medicine doctor probably can't. So my recommendation would be, and I've told you the basis for that, the reason why, so that people can understand how fundamentally important it is to have a good functional medicine doctor, but also to work with a functional practitioner or a nutritionist or someone that is at the forefront of that side of things. And an example of that would be Ryan Carter, Levite, who is one of my very dear friends. He has been on the journey, I guess, pretty much, along the way as well. And I met him at a Tony Robbins event years ago and become good friends. But he's been on the journey of knowing biohacking, getting into nutrition training, qualifying, understanding light therapy, blue blocking glasses, grounding, nature, the right nutrition, what nutrition to have based on personalized needs. And a lot of these things, and working alongside a functional medicine doctor was the creme de la creme with those two, for instance. Or there's Marek Doyle Nutrition on Instagram, who is also a good one like that, who I work with, both of those guys personally, actually, to help guide me, as well as a functional doctor, so that way I'm learning from all three of them and bringing it together and going, where do I need to go from here? Opposed to just one source that says, no, I don't believe in probiotics, or no, I haven't even heard of what a peptide is. What is that, Tim? Or vitamin D therapy, why would anyone do that? You know, it really, you can bring it together. And then I think armed with the right guidance and a clear brain, you can figure out the best route using their experiences, and you can run it past them. So that's what I would do differently, in all honesty. Find that if I could do it all over again, I would start at that exact point. Now the space and the training and the knowledge has moved on so far that there are people like Ryan and Marek and good functional medicine doctors out there, but 10 years ago there weren't. And I think it's come around through a place of need that a lot of people aren't being served by the traditional system. They're not getting healthier by going to their doctors. People are knowing that they're trying to get you to take drugs all the time and not necessarily prescribing exercise or even your diet and saying, no, vitamin C doesn't work, and I think more people have awareness around that, especially around the current viral times.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I'd do differently, but I couldn't then, but people can now. So that's what I recommend.
Yeah, I think it's a really key point around the difference between a functional medicine practitioner and doctor. And certainly with nutritional therapists in the UK, and I imagine the US, just that background and their training, and so much of what we come back to in whatever space we're in, whether it is kind of the biohacking space or lifestyle medicine, whatever term you want to use, it normally comes back to some element of lifestyle. You mentioned things like obviously light therapy, blue light blocking glasses. And I have a bias. My background obviously is in nutritional therapy, but the stuff that we get taught from day one is just so highly applicable when we're talking about chronic degenerative conditions and the underlying things that are going to be contributing to the symptoms that then get a diagnosis. Mm-hmm. And I have a really interesting personal story that kind of very much fits into that. It's actually also around dentistry. But to cut a very long story short, we went and saw a dentist. It was just in our local town at the time. We got given some advice that just didn't really sit with us. It was going to cost a small fortune. We went to get a second opinion and ultimately got a very different solution that turned out to be the right one. So I think the idea of doing your homework as well when it's looking for your team of health practitioners is just essential. So yeah, I think that's a really important point for people to appreciate.
I think one big failing I do see with people that are hyper-stimulated, hyper-dopamine dominant, and paranoid about their health or whatnot. And I've got a few people that pop into my mind that I know from this journey, but they listen to too many people and make their own decisions with too much guidance. And like one person will say, go low carb. Another person will say, add in carbs because you need carbs. Someone else will say, don't drink alcohol. Another one will say, drink alcohol, but in moderation. And they have like 10 people around them and they'll just be searching for someone to tell them the right thing to do and never actually knowing where to go. So there is an element of picking the right people to work with. And then not just chasing yeses or stimulus. And I think that that's a big failing for a lot of people, which is why I think, like, for instance, well-rounded people like a functional medicine doctor and a functional practitioner or a nutritionist is more than enough, as long as you ask them the right questions and vet them up front. And I think that's critical, in fact, because I still see the people that are still chasing people to confirm their own bias and asking lots of people that are still chronically ill. And then, you know, they feel a little bit better after a while. They lose touch with the practitioners. The practitioner loses touch with where they are. They start drinking again, and then they get ill again a month later. And it's just this whole, ping-ponging. So I think that's a big area that's not generally spoke about in biohacking enough, because biohackers are like, I guess, renegade health people that seem to take everything into their own hands without any guidance. I get guidance. I get very good guidance, but I also do my due diligence and I do my own research. And you know, before having a procedure or an operation or something or other, I know what they're doing and I know why. And little bit by little bit, I'm learning more and more and more about the body and what it needs as I go along. I've been doing that for 10 years.
Yeah. I think two key things from there is, you know, this idea of reestablishing sometimes trust with our own body and the messages that it's sending us. And going back to your kind of point around sort of practitioners and sort of vetting them, I actually think also looking for a practitioner who, at least in certain contexts, doesn't have a strong opinion, you know, because there's so many variables that come into it. So, you know, Tim, if you were to ask me something about should I do this or should I do that, there's a running joke in certain circles, which the answer is always going to start with it depends. You know, we need a little bit more information. So to have kind of rigid views or beliefs in any area of health, we have to kind of challenge straight away, ultimately, I think. But with that in mind, it kind of raises something that a thought of mine through following your work over the last probably couple of years, especially on things like Instagram over the last year or so. It feels, from my perspective, like your views and almost, what's the best way of putting this? Yeah, I guess your views have slightly changed. Like there's been an evolution, certainly, I can see within some of the stuff that you've put out. Is that accurate, would you say?
Yeah, big time. It's funny because I did a podcast about a year ago, 8 months ago. And someone said to me, oh, I love it when you talked about this. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I talked about that time ago. And I've done the research and looked through historically and how it evolved. I think, yes, it has completely. And in some, I guess some people, they talk about what they're amazing at, and then you hear them change their view slightly. And I always used to judge people and go, oh, they used to say this, but now they're saying that. That means that they're all wrong, completely wrong. But I think not only are we finding out more information, and something might have worked before, it might work now, or something new might be a refinement better. I think I really appreciate when I see people say that they've learned something better and then adjust their trajectory. And I think Paul Saladino has been a case of that at the moment, where he's really adjusting his approach to carnivore slightly, which I really appreciate. He's going, I got it right, but here's the more refined version. So there is an element of that. And I think also, and I'm not saying I was wrong previously, I may be in some cases, who knows. When I was at Upgrade Labs conference last year, Joe McCullough, Dr. McCullough was on stage, And he said, oh, there's this thing about glycine. And he was pointing at the board and he was saying, there's this really amazing thing. And he went, damn, I only learned it the other day and I can't remember it. And I really wanted to share it with you guys. And I was just like, my God, this is Dr. McCullough, who's the biggest resource of health knowledge probably on the planet, with the biggest website on the planet. And he is admitting that he's forgotten something and he only learned something the other day. Kudos. Like, that is integrity, real integrity. I said to him afterwards, like, I so appreciate that you did that. And he was like, why? You know, it was like, because it shows integrity. You're not going to try and bluff something. You know, it shows you really are always trying to be better. And when you don't know, you say so. So I've kind of adopted that approach. And that was a big moment for me, actually, because Dr. McCullough I knew about 5 years before I knew about Dave Asprey. So it's just kind of like, when you're wrong, admit it. When you can do something better, admit it. And I shared a post out the other week, was like, when you know better, do better. So that's the case. And I think the other point to answer that is, with things like grounding and nature, I like being a quantified biohacker, not to the extreme where I'm stressed about tracking everything, which is detrimental to health because your cortisol spikes all the time because you're so stressed and you're in fight or flight. But to the point where I go, okay, I'm looking at this data, it's showing me some really strong trends for me personally, and I'm going to optimize based on that, not, you know, down to the 0.1, more like the 1. And so when someone introduced grounding to me, it was actually Matt Maruka from Raw Optics. He was telling me about grounding and Jim Oshman's work and Clint Ober and all this lot. And this is a year or two ago. And I was just like, it's a bit too woo for me. While I can appreciate what you're saying, it's just not, it can be pushed back on too hard. There's nothing to measure it against. And I was, you know, and it played on my mind quite a bit. And we were traveling around America at the time. And just, you know, we talked over the period of weeks. And then I watched a thing on grounding that showed how you can quantify it, how you can quantify what it does to your body. So when I got back to England, I then brought a multimeter. I measured my body voltage, grounded and not grounded. And I went down the rabbit hole and I listened to every podcast I could about grounding. Read every book I could, and there's not many. I watched the grounding documentary. I got in touch with Clint Ober and spoken to him quite a few times now directly. Invited Jim Oshman to the conference, who he did a release of the documentary, and I really went to town on it. And the moment I could quantify it and I could see things like the red blood cells before and after grounding, which shows that they're clumped together before grounding, the electrical charge isn't good. And then after grounding, you can see that the red blood cells are equidistant and flowing as they should be. And then thermography showing before and after grounding to show that the inflammation in the body has removed. And the body voltage testing the earthing equipment, I went, this is quantified enough for me. I'm willing to talk about this now and incorporate it into my life, which is what I did. And with each thing that I talk about, it is always exactly that approach. It's like, is it real? Can it be quantified? Does it actually help? Which is kind of the approach that doctors take, or like allopathic medicine, because they don't talk about some of these things that work like grounding, because if they listen to every single person that always said, this works, this works, this works, this works, this works, they would have no baseline to ever work with anyone on their health, because they would be listening to all these things that could be hearsay. So that their approach is to shut down, and only when they're taught something in medical school do they then implement it into their practice, because then they're covered. Now, because of funding and the way that medical school is medical first, then they don't necessarily learn about those things, but they are there to help people with their health ultimately. So the retraining or training of these things are important. I take that approach of saying, right, I'm shut down to things that are woo, that can't be quantified or won't help with health. But in the background, I do test things that I want to see for myself, whether or not they work or not, like liver flushes or certain peptides and things like that I can't necessarily quantify just yet. But I won't talk about it because I don't want people to incorporate it until I know for sure whether or not, one, it works for me, or two, it can be quantified. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes huge sense. I was about to ask, expound on some of these things that you're currently kind of playing with, but I get not wanting to kind of go there, certainly publicly, until you're a little bit more, for want of a better word, confident in some of what's going on.
I mean, I think ultimately the basis of all of it is, and I hate to use this term because I feel like it's a cliche, and I didn't really get it myself until 9 months ago. And I talked about the fundamentals of health, of what you get right before you do everything else, or where to begin in biohacking or whatever, is that what did we evolve with? I.e., if we evolved, we survived. And if we survived, we're here today. And therefore, by presupposition, it worked. Whereas things that we're doing that we don't evolve with, like in the last 100 years, health has decreased significantly, chronic health has increased significantly. What are we doing in the last 100 years? And what should we eject? And what should we bring in from past ancestral health that will help us continue to evolve and survive? So when and I'll be quick on this because I feel like I'm talking a lot about it, but it's really a fundamental mind shift, because I spent 10 weeks traveling around Europe during COVID. Okay. I wasn't careful. I wore a mask when when told to, or out of respect for workers, not because I believe that they make a big difference, but they do make some difference from coughing and spit and whatnot. But I wasn't careful. And I've tested multiple times in multiple countries. And I'm negative and no antibodies. It might be that I am a biohacker and I've dedicated my life to this, and then I just brushed it off, even though I had a cold while I was away. Or it might be that I'm doing the right basics. And while I was in Croatia, while I was in Germany in the Bavarian Alps, while I was swimming in the sea every day, getting minerals from the sea and hydrating and eating fresh fish, not farmed fish or fish that is caught several weeks ago that's been frozen, covered in chemicals and stuff, it was natural environment and I was thriving. My brain was sharper than I've ever been. I felt the best I've ever been. I come back to London and then it hits me quite hard. And that's not necessarily just because of the environment or the lack of sun. I have collagen in the cupboard, opposed to eating fresh fish. I have fish collagen. I don't eat so much like fresh food straight to plate from farm or whatever. It's stuff that's been packaged because it has to be brought into the city. I'm not sleeping in a cabin where, and I've got some LED lights, most of them are gone, granted, but it's not just night light or phone light. When I've got blue blockers on, I have to wear blue blockers, and there's a lot more skin getting blue light on. I'm having to drink, bottled water that's been flown from another country, because I only drink from glass bottles, opposed to local sourced mineral water that's really, really, really high in magnesium naturally and bicarbonate naturally. So it's all these things that add up, hundreds of things that take us away from our natural environment, even though I'm a biohacker and I do everything to reverse the modern things to have a more of an ancestral background. And yet it's almost impossible. So the basis is, what did our ancestors do and how can we reverse it, and what can we be aware of to do that? And that's really the mindset of everything. All of the other things like red light or peptides or, grounding mats and things like that, they're all bonuses, but they're all things to reverse the damage we're doing from living such an extravagant, lovely life in lovely homes in amazing cities full of toxic air and chemicals.
Yeah.
I hope that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. And it brings me back a little bit to your first recommendation around finding your health team, basically, because certainly one of the common things I find myself doing in clinic is quite often having to rein clients back in. So they're going to some of the slightly more, for want of a better term, extreme interventions or things that will give them that final 1% of health optimization, when actually they're not doing some of these fundamentals on a day-to-day basis. And that's definitely a common mistake that I see in my clientele. I've been guilty of it certainly as well. We're kind of so desperate to get well that we all sometimes just clutch onto things in the hope that there is that kind of external solution. So no, that deeply resonates. And something that comes up from some of these things you've mentioned, whether it's peptides, etc., is, if it's possible to answer, what have been some of the most significant things for you in regards to shifting your health? Whether that's something that you have been able to quantify, or maybe it's just sort of a gut feeling.
It's a really good question. I think the best thing you can do for health, and I used to say sleep optimization, but it's bigger than that. I think, and everyone's talking about circadian rhythm optimization now, or your circadian clock or your daily clock. And I think a good place to start for anyone listening to this would be to read The Circadian Code by Dr. Sachin Panda, who he's speaking at the summit in January
Nice.
in London, which I'm very, 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 very excited about. It's not about optimizing your sleep, it's about optimizing your day and making sure you're doing the right thing at the right time of day. Now, I'll give you a quick, and I won't labor on the point, but if you're exercising in the evening, it's not what our ancestors would have done, because it would be nighttime and they would be by a campfire, probably eating the remains of the meat that they'd caught in the morning, when they should be exercising, high intensity training, running after an animal to try and kill it, or collecting fruits and vegetables if you're not a meat eater. So the timing of day is important, and certain genes turn on at different times of the day, such as after sunset, roughly dusk. Our insulin, the genes for insulin actually turn off or turn down, and we produce up to 50 times less insulin after sunset than we do before. So if we eat a meal after sunset, we don't produce as much insulin, which means we have higher blood glucose through the night, which means we're storing that glucose as fat, instead of using the energy we've collected through the day to repair the damage that we've done through the day. We're actually storing it as fat, which means that we put on weight and we don't have as good health. So if you understand that we should optimize based on what our ancestors did, which is the mindset from before, you wake, you stick your face in a stream and drink some water, which is high in minerals. That gives you some energy and supports your adrenals. You then do your high intensity exercise, which is running after an animal or collecting food. You then bring it back to the cave for the family to prepare, which some of it would be left in the cave to ferment, thus not needing things like sauerkraut and fermented foods and repopulating our gut. It would then be cooked throughout the day, and then at sunset, pretty much everyone goes to sleep, including the animals. Nothing really stays up at night, which means that you survived, because people that sleep survived. Our ancestors did. Ones that didn't sleep, well, they didn't survive, which is why they're not around today. So that's why things like the blue light on your phone are so disruptive to sleep. We didn't evolve with blue light in the evening. We evolved with firelight at most. So sleep optimization to tie into that would be wearing blue blocking glasses, because we do have exposure to blue light after sunset. So those are an absolute non-negotiable. If there's one biohack I ever do, it is wearing my blue blocking glasses after sunset, at least 3 hours before bed, at least. Okay. And because that means we produce the sleep hormone melatonin, as I'm sure you're well aware, and which means that we sleep better. It's a great antioxidant, and it helps reverse the damage we've done during the day. It's also, the second thing would be not eating too far after sunset, so 7, 8 o'clock. Now, I tested this myself because obviously I wear the Oura ring, and I always noticed that my resting heart rate and heart rate variability, so my resting heart rate would come down and my heart rate variability would go up about 3 hours after sleeping. And when I started wearing a glucose monitor by Freestyle Libre, which I did pretty much for the whole year up until a month ago, I noticed that around that time where my resting heart rate came down and my heart rate variability went up, my blood glucose finally got to the bottom.
Huh.
So for me, it's like, hang on a minute. So my data is showing that my heart rate is lower, my heart rate variability is higher, and my blood glucose at that exact time is the lowest. So it's like, so if it's 3 hours into my sleep, why don't I eat 3 hours earlier? No brainer. And so what happens? Your sleep becomes deeper, you get more REM sleep, your heart rate comes down, your heart rate variability goes up, your glucose comes down, you become leaner and healthier. So that is really the best place anyone, in my opinion, can start. And you can, if you go, well, I'm not so sure about that, which there are a lot of skeptics because everyone's an expert. Everyone's different, and everyone has different gut bacteria. Everyone has different insulin response. and everyone has different bedtimes and eating habits and livers that cope or don't. You can get an Oura ring, you can get a blood glucose monitor, and you can track this stuff yourself and see what works best for you. So that's where I would start, without a shadow of a doubt. Yeah.
No, it's a great response. I think you just have to look at the research around sort of night shift workers and the consequences of having kind of a completely alternative circadian rhythm to see the consequences of it. And it is quite scary. And you kind of have to, it's almost comical really how wrong we've got modern living. But it is at the same time, you could argue, a sign of how resilient we can be. Yes, there's an epidemic of chronic conditions, but there's also an awful lot of people who are able to maintain in a pretty good state of health with some of those variables in place. And what you mentioned earlier, Tim, around thinking about, I guess, our ancestors and what they got right. There's an amazing paper that if you haven't yet seen, I'll send it over to you. And the title is basically Acquiring Resilience. So they kind of compare our acquired immune system, this idea that once we're exposed to the bug, then we have this kind of immune response that's more efficient the next time we're exposed to it. It's the same thing from a resiliency perspective. And they kind of looked through our evolution and they basically said, okay, well, sunlight, fasting, exercise, hypoxia, certain toxins within food, which I'm sure, Paul Saladino would have a slightly different concept there, but their argument is the kind of whole hormesis thing, that, the amounts of resveratrol, etc., that we're being exposed to by eating some of these plants is actually supporting our resiliency. So it completely ties in with what you've been saying, which is, really mastering these fundamentals, using our data so we can track it and understand in us as a unique individual what's working and what can we optimize ultimately. So yeah, I completely concur with the circadian rhythm element.
Well, I think the other thing on this is, if you don't mind me branching off a little bit, is that obviously circadian rhythm is, the ancestral mindset is the biggest thing. It overarches everything. Nothing else matters. If you think, what would our ancestors do that survived, that is the overarching mindset, nothing else. But then we have things like toxicities that our ancestors didn't have. Mercury, or openly in the environment, nuclear issues, food chain supply issues with, things like titanium dioxide in it that we're having all day, every day, which makes us get an immune response to titanium, which, whatever. The point is that we have these toxins as well. So what Dr. Klinghardt calls them is blockages, or there's another word for it which has slipped my mind, but essentially a blockage. So for instance, we can be thriving as our ancestors did, but if there's other things that our ancestors didn't have, which we've introduced to the environment, such as these toxins, they're going to block us. An example of that is, which is why I talk about dental a lot, and it's been a big part of my journey, was metal fillings. If you've got mercury in your mouth and you're constantly topping up your gut with mercury from your filling, that's going to be interrupting your gut bacteria on a daily basis. All day, every day, you'll be lining your digestive system with mercury and various other metals. And that's an interference. That is exact interference, which you need to remove and get gone so that your body can then start basically going back to where it should be. So you have things like metal fillings, which is one, or metal implants. And I had a metal implant actually, which I had removed in January, which is an interference. I had metal fillings as well. Also, I had impacted wisdom teeth, all 4 of them. And because our jaws don't develop as they would, because we don't eat the same way, we have impacted wisdom teeth, which then create cavitations, which are necrosis areas in the bone, which then our immune systems are constantly fighting these low-grade infections in our jaw, which then give us chronic health issues and cavitations. I mean, traditional dentists don't believe in it. Because they haven't been trained in it and they don't know what to look for on an X-ray. Good biological dentists, such as my good friend Dr. Dominic Nitschwitz, who's also a speaker at the summit, knows what to look for, and even trained in things like kinesiology and biological dentistry, standard dentistry, functional medicine, all these things together, and says, well, actually, a lot of it starts in the mouth with blockages. So if you have root canal treated teeth, dentists that listen to this will roll their eyes and go, oh no, we don't believe in that. Root canals are safe. They could be. They could be. But the thing is a dead organ such as a tooth that's been cleaned out will harbor some bacteria, however well it's cleaned, or could do, not necessarily definite, which means it could be an interference that our ancestors wouldn't have had, which could cause an infection, which could cause an immune response. Now, even Dr. Harry Adelson, who's the full body stem cell doctor that spoke at the summit last year, he's a very good friend of Dave Asprey's. He's one of the pioneers in stem cell therapy. He had heart issue from I think it's a root canal treated tooth. And it's very well documented about heart issues, specific heart infections from teeth infections. Now, if that's possible, and it's documented, how is it not possible that other ones like wisdom teeth or whatever can cause this? So a lot of the things would be people are trying to fix their gut, but in fact, they haven't fixed their mouth. And we've got a lot more bacteria in our mouth than we do even on the back end. So if you're optimizing your gut, but not optimizing your mouth, and you've got blockages there, you're never going to fix the whole ecosystem because our ancestors wouldn't have had it. So there is an element, obviously, of ancestral health and also clearing out the crap that we have created as well. I guess an extreme example would be if we had poisoning from something that was radioactive, for instance, you'd need to, if it was possible, clear it out before you could expect to have health again, no matter how many exercise, burpees, or how much food you ate or what supplements you took. It just wouldn't work. There's a lot of these chronic low-grade things that we're dealing with that we just don't necessarily identify, and therefore that blocks us from having flourishing health. So yeah, I know that's a long-winded answer, but I feel like from a mindset, that's where I've arrived at. And yeah,
it's, I think, breaking it down that way, it's empowering. I forget the doctor. There was I think a naturopathic doctor maybe in the 70s, and his whole thing was to begin with, just ask ourselves, what do we need to add and what do we need to remove? As you say, what are the blockages or what's the resistance, and what are the things that could be lacking? And it's just a really nice framework, I think, to then move forward and understand, okay, let's start with these interventions, track it if we want to see how it's shifting things, and go from there.
Well, Dr. Ted Akikoso even puts it more succinctly than that. He looks at cellular health. So he looks at the cell and goes, what's in the cell that shouldn't be? And what isn't in the cell that should be? That's it. Which is why I like things like phospholipids or phosphatidylcholine from Body Bio, or sodium potassium butyrate, for instance, because that's all about making sure that you're getting the right stuff from your gut into the cell, because one deals with the cell membrane so things can get in and out correctly, and the other sorts the gut so you can get the stuff from your food into the cell. So it's really a simple what's in the cell that shouldn't be and what isn't in the cell that should be. That's basically what it comes down to. What's stopping that? And I think things like EMFs people have been asking a lot about. That also interferes with cellular health in some way. We don't still understand, but we do know it is a risk of some description, and it's controversial, but it does affect us in some way. We just can't confirm 100% which. And that's a classic example of something our ancestors wouldn't have had that needs looking at as an interference, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Excellent. Tim, I'm mindful of time, but I have two questions, if we may. The first one is just what are the sort of non-negotiables for you in your day? And I thought it might be nice just to give people maybe a little bit of insight into, for you at the moment, because I'm sure it changes obviously from time to time, but what would you say, apart from the blue light blocking glasses, which you've mentioned, might be some of those others sort of non-negotiables? And then is there anything that you're happy just to share in regards to the Health Optimization Summit? Just so if people haven't yet seen some of the stuff out there with it, I'd love to just give them an insight into what's going on in January.
Of course. Non-negotiables is obviously blue blocking. That's the number one thing. Number two is eating before sunset. And I will fast if I don't eat within an hour of sunset. Grounding, I try to be grounded for about 80% of every day. As we're speaking, I'm on a wobble board, which is placed on an earthing mat on the ground down there. I've got an earthing mat, which my wrists are on here. I'm standing at a standing desk, so it's at the right height. So if you see me moving around, that's why.
That's right.
So I'm earthed out, and I've got my core moving pretty much all day. So those are pretty much non-negotiables. If I'm wherever I am in the world, even if I'm on the beach, I'll be earthed out, working on the beach, earthed out, standing where possible, or sitting with good posture, stretching my hips every day, hydrating with the right minerals. So Celtic sea salt is what I use in a glass of water all day, every day, the right amount, because that hydrates us, because processed water is low in minerals. And I think one of the biggest things is growth mindset or positive mindset. Instead of, if someone starts arguing, you start, I think I like to be cognizant of it and break it down and think, what can I learn from this? And, instead of hearing, for instance, a girl being jealous of you hang around with other girls who are like, well, actually, what does this tell me? It tells me that I'm important to her. And, not having an argument about it, being stoic and just saying, okay, so what can we learn from this? And I think that's just one example in a current context that's important to me. But in general, it's like if someone trolls you on Instagram, which has been a thing for me because my profile's grown quite quickly and I'm getting a lot more messages than I ever have done, and there's a lot more trolls as a result, but there's also a lot of positive things, and we tend to focus on the negative things opposed to the good things. So if you think in statistics, I'm having 200 or 300 positive comments for every one bad. So really focusing on the one bad would be stupid, but it's good to look at it and go, have I done something wrong? Can I improve? Or is that person just an asshole? Focusing on all the good stuff. So I think the positive mindset when it comes to health of going, okay, I have a new symptom, not panicking, because a lot of people go, oh no, I've got this pain today and it's really hurting. I don't know what it is. What's the bigger meaning in this? What's going on with my body? And then they get into a heightened stress state, opposed to going, what is all the good stuff that I've worked through right now for my body? What has it evolved? And then parking the worry about the issue that you're having for a day or two, maybe 3, and going, has it come and gone? Because I guess if you were to list down every symptom everyone has ever had, and then write down how many hours or days it's lasted, most of them would have gone within 72 hours, even a bad back or a headache or whatever, which means that you don't need to worry about it on the bigger picture. But if you start seeing trends, like you have a headache every 3 days that lasts 6 hours, you might want to think, well, what's that about? But really having a positive mindset and focusing on that means that your body is naturally in a less stressed state. It's more parasympathetic opposed to sympathetic. It means that you can actually heal better, and life is a lot better and like a warm knife through butter opposed to constantly trying to chop a frozen steak, So those would be the non-negotiables. And I think the things that have helped me grow is not reacting to things so negatively, or really looking at the great in what people say and giving them the benefit of the doubt. And I think that really pairs well with the whole biohacking mindset, because it's optimizing yourself and relationships around you, which is also great for health. Yeah.
Beautiful.
I feel like it was a long bloody answer. I'm sorry about that, but
no, not at all. No, I think that's really good. And actually, it might be my perception that's wrong here, but one of the things I don't feel that certainly I see as much as I guess maybe I would expect or hope, for one of the better words, is kind of that sort of emotional mindset element of stuff in the sort of the biohacking space. Obviously, it's not necessarily a direct fit, but it's such an important part of health optimization, as you say, that it really should be right there alongside some of these other fundamental elements. So I think that answer is spot on.
Well, I think there's a virtual biohacking conference that Dave's running next month, actually. And I just shared a post about it yesterday. And this isn't a plug, but it's the purpose for saying about it is that one of the things in the list of what they'll be talking about is gratitude. Now, everyone says gratitude, and until you really understand it, it's just another word. You go, yeah, gratitude, all right, whatever. And until you've really gone through the journey and explored it and really understand the difference from having a negative mindset and looking at people negatively and focusing on their bad things through to going, appreciating for their good things and only their good things. And if there's a bad trait, okay, well, that's something for them to work through, but don't judge them on it, like let them do it. When you then hear the word gratitude, it's like, actually, it really makes sense. And that does fit into biohacking very well. The big ego also fits into biohacking very well, because everyone wants to speak the loudest on, be on the biggest stage and everything. I mean, I see this more and more speakers and more people popping up everywhere. And I'm not going to rule out myself from that. I'm not going to deny it, but I think that the gratitude piece, when understood, is a really important piece in this whole health. And I think being good on the inside as well as the outside is true. It's true happiness, because you're conveying what you feel and think on the inside and the outside, opposed to just one or the other. And I think it's actually, we had a customer, and I'll round off on this before I mention the summit. We had a customer get cross about us for not getting an email from the summit, going crazy at us, and demanding this, that, and the other. It's completely unwarranted, because we're not in that frame of mind. We're always very happy. We're always in a positive mindset and things. And I just replied and just said, I'm sorry, but this is not how biohackers behave. Like, you really should look at this inner anger issue, because we just don't accept that behavior. And then he came back and apologized and said, you're right, I'm sorry, I'm stressed around Corona times, I've got this going on, I've got that going on, and I'm really sorry, I didn't mean to take it out on you. You're right, I'll try to be better. And I think that does sum up the industry, or should I say the space, very well, and a lot of the people in it, because they come from a health issue place, and they want to be healthier, they want to be better, and when they're aware of their own BS, then they try to improve it. And then the people that it doesn't resonate with, they get out of the space quite quickly, and therefore the space is left with a lot of great people, which is what I see today. And I guess that takes me onto the summit, because that's really been my mission, finding the best speakers that are authentic, that talk about the best health topics, some ancestral health, some futuristic things, the ones with the best research, not necessarily the most medically accepted, some of them, but some of them very, very medically accepted. And I bring them all together and say, look, we're all smart, we're all got different viewpoints, we can challenge each other, we can bring in everything from health and fitness, medical wellness, nutrition, biohacking, paleo, keto, ancestral health, everything all together, and go, what's the goal? It's health for all of us, so we can survive longer. And that's really the mindset of the summit, and every speaker and every exhibitor that I invite. And I do invite them. I don't, like, we have a few that come to us and say, look, can you assess our products? But most of them have been invited by me personally, because I use them on a day-to-day basis. We do this over 2 days, January 30 and 31st, 2021. We've got 40 speakers, 60 exhibitors, 2 days, talks, workshops, movement workshops, product sampling, and the biggest names from around the world that come to London. And I'm very flattered that they do this for me to support the space. So yeah, that's basically the summit. And I think we got a few offers going on for tickets at the moment. The cheapest that they're going to be, I think it's £299, something like that.
Okay.
And that can be found at summit.healthoptimisation.com. Yeah, and I'm at Tim Biohacker on Instagram.
Perfect. Yeah, no, it sounds like I didn't actually make it to I think, was it the first one last time, the summit? Yeah. But it looks like an amazing weekend. So I'm excited about it for 2021.
Yeah, but it's quite good actually, because people go, oh, it's only year one, they're learning. Well, I did the due diligence on PaleoFX, and they become good friends, and I guess investors as well. And I got to know the guys at Bulletproof conference as well, and did my due diligence on just about every other conference that there is in space, and learned from all their mistakes. I wrote down everything that I loved about each of the conferences, each of the things I didn't love about the conferences, got my teams to do the same, and friends, documented it all, and then built a summit based on those, like a true biohacker would. And I was told by some of the guys from Bulletproof that it's more like a year 3 or year 4, not a year 1. And we had 1,164 people in year 1, and we were full up. So yeah, I can't believe we pulled it off. But year 2 is looking to be even better. Even though COVID's happened, people have been supporting us, buying tickets, exhibitors have been signing up, knowing that it's going to be a big thing once Corona's gone.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's the thing. I think there's been obviously the COVID thing this year, but it just reinforces the importance of all of these conversations and events, definitely.
Yeah, 100%. And I think having a brand called Health Optimisation at the time where everyone wants to optimize their health, or they want to wear a face mask and kick the can down the road. But it's really worked well for us, I think. And I think that's just because the product is health optimization and spreading awareness on things that people really, really need to know about now. So that's why I think we've done so well this year. You know, we're almost sold out of exhibiting space, and we've done that through a pandemic. Tickets are sold. We've done like 4 times as much as we did in the previous year at that point before the event as well. So it's been amazing support. And I think without the brand signing up or the tickets selling, we wouldn't have continued through the pandemic, because we wouldn't have had their vote of confidence, but we have, which has been bloody amazing and flattering in all honesty, because it was just a little idea a couple of years ago, and now it's, you know, evolving into this worldwide movement. So yeah,
amazing. No, it's really exciting times. Is there anything that you want to conclude with, Tim? Anything you just want to re-emphasize, or something that we haven't yet touched on, or do you feel we've covered everything you want to?
No, I feel like we've covered everything, and I've spoken a lot today, which is very different to my usual podcast actually. But I feel like I had free reign today, and I feel like we're in a similar mindset from what I know of your content and the things that you talk about. So it's nice just having a conversation, I guess, where your listeners are listening into us two talking about stuff that they wouldn't normally necessarily hear like this. So
yeah,
I've really enjoyed it. But I do think that the ancestral mindset is something that everyone that listens to this, the question being, what would our ancestors that survived, what would they have done, is the thing that people should take away from this today. Yeah, and if anyone's got any questions, obviously drop me a line on Instagram or have a look at my feed and comment on there, because then everyone else gets to benefit from the comments and questions.
Yeah, no, perfect. Brilliant. Thank you, Tim. I appreciate, or I can only guess really how busy you are. So to take the hour out, I do really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I enjoy doing these things, and it's good to explore and have it from several points of view. So thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.